The daughter of a woman accused in a gruesome murder in Prince George's County takes the stand.
Candace Craig is charged with killing and dismembering her own mother. Her daughter testified today, recounting what her mother allegedly told her to do to help dispose of her grandmother's body. Fox 5's Lily Zhang joins us live from Upper Marlboro. She is tracking the testimony, the dramatic testimony that went down today. Lily?
Angie, Kenneth, good evening to you. We just wrapped up court about an hour ago, and like you mentioned, this testimony, it was graphic. We are hearing from Craig's daughter, Celia. Now, keep in mind, she has already accepted a plea deal to accessory after the fact, and she says that part of her deal was to tell the truth at this trial. We should warn you, some of the details she did share with the jury today, they are pretty disturbing details. So for background, again, we're talking about Celia Hardy. That is the then 19-year-old daughter. She testified that she heard her grandmother scream inside of their Hill Road home in May of 2023. She says that she was instructed by her mother, Candace Craig, to not go inside of her grandmother's room. She eventually did, to find Margaret Craig's body in a bin and a trash bag over her head. She also told the jury that there was blood on the carpet, but her mother would not tell her exactly what happened. Hardy testified in the past hour today that it was her mother's idea to burn the body outside of the home a few days later. She said it did not go as planned, but neighbors started noticing that big fire. So she says her mother ordered a chainsaw and then began cutting the body up the next day. Now, the state did not finish questioning this witness, so they are expected to resume tomorrow morning. At that point, we will expect to hear from the defense attorneys for Candace Craig.
On a quiet street in Prince George's County, Maryland, a neighborhood that looked exactly like yours, exactly like mine, police officers knocked on a door. They were looking for a missing woman, a 71-year-old grandmother named Margaret Craig. What they found inside that house would stop seasoned investigators cold. Not because crime scenes are unusual in this line of work, but because of who did this. And because of what they tried to do afterward to make sure no one ever found out. Listen carefully, because this case, the case of Margaret Craig, goes deeper than the crime. It goes into the heart of a family that had been rotting from the inside out for years, and it raises a question that will sit with you long after this video ends. At what point does a family argument become something you cannot come back from? I'm going to walk you through everything: the victim, the killer, the motive, the cover-up, and a granddaughter caught in the middle of the worst decision of her life. Let's begin. Before we talk about the crime, I want you to know who Margaret Craig was. She was 71 years old, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had spent 7 decades building a life, raising children, watching grandchildren grow. She was sharp. People who knew her described someone who did not let things go. If she believed she had been wronged, especially by people she loved, she would say something about it. She wasn't the type to go quiet. And that quality, that refusal to be silent, may have been the thing that got her killed. Because in the weeks and months leading up to her disappearance, there was a dispute, a serious one, between Margaret and her daughter, Candace. Money, always money. Prosecutors would later allege that the argument between Margaret and Candace Craig centered on financial fraud, that Candace believed, rightly or wrongly, that her mother had cheated her, had taken something from her. Now, we don't know the full details of that financial dispute. Court documents give us pieces, but here's what we do know. Whatever happened between them, Margaret Craig walked into her daughter's house one day, and she never walked out. It was other family members, not Candace, who raised the alarm. They hadn't been able to reach Margaret for several days. That wasn't unusual by itself, but Margaret was someone who kept in touch. She picked up the phone. She answered messages. When she went silent, really silent, people in her life noticed, so they called the police. Officers were sent to the home that Candace Craig shared, the last known place Margaret had been heading. What happened when they got to that door is the moment this story goes from a missing persons case to something much darker. The moment officers stepped into that residence, before they had searched a single room, before they had opened a single door, they knew. The smell. For anyone who hasn't worked in law enforcement, let me explain something. The odor of human decomposition is unlike anything else in the world. There is no mistaking it. Every officer present in that home understood immediately this was no longer a missing persons call. They were at a crime scene. They went to the basement. In the basement of that house, inside trash bags, they found Margaret Craig. What had been done to her body, what her own daughter had done to her, was so extreme, so calculated, that investigators who had worked violent crimes for decades would later describe it as one of the most disturbing scenes they had encountered. I want to pause here, because what the documents describe is not something I'm going to dwell on in graphic detail. You don't need that, and neither do I. But I do need you to understand the significance. When a killer goes to these lengths, chainsaw, fire, attempts to destroy evidence over multiple days, what they are telling you, whether they mean to or not, is that they were thinking, that they had time to stop, and they didn't. This was not panic. This was a decision.
Candace Craig is Margaret's daughter. When officers came to her home, when they found her mother's remains in the basement, Candace lied to them. She lied, according to prosecutors, about what she knew, about when she last saw her mother, about what had happened in that house. And those lies were not convincing. Candace Craig was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, unlawfully disposing of a human body. First-degree murder in Maryland requires the prosecution to prove premeditation, that it wasn't an accident, that it wasn't a sudden snap, that Candace intended to kill her mother. And prosecutors believed they could prove exactly that. Now here's where the defense tried to draw a line. The defense attorneys argued, yes, Candace lied to police. Yes, she attempted to dispose of her mother's body. But does that prove she intended to kill her? Couldn't she have panicked after an accidental death? Couldn't the cover-up have been a desperate response to something that spiraled out of control, not a premeditated murder? It's a reasonable legal argument. Juries have acquitted on less. But here's the problem with that argument in this particular case. The evidence of what was done to Margaret Craig's body, the chainsaw, the fire, the extended period of disposal, paints a picture of someone who had time, who made choices, repeatedly. And Candace was not working alone. The second person in that house, the person who allegedly helped Candace dispose of her own grandmother's body, was Candace's daughter, Margaret's granddaughter.
I want you to think about this for a moment. You are a young woman. You are living in your mother's house. Your grandmother, a woman you have known your entire life, who came to birthdays, who called on holidays, who was as much a part of your world as anyone could be, is dead in the basement. And your mother is telling you to help. What do? I'm not excusing what happened next. I'm asking you to sit inside that moment. Because the granddaughter in this case, whose name has not been widely published to protect her identity, made choices that will follow her for the rest of her life. According to court proceedings, she helped Candace attempt to dispose of Margaret's body. She participated in the cutting, in the burning. She helped try to erase her own grandmother. And then, when the state came for her, when the deal was on the table, she stood up in court and testified against her own mother. She chose the truth over loyalty. Or maybe she chose survival. Maybe there's no difference at this point. Either way, the granddaughter pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact. She was released from jail as part of her cooperation agreement, and she walked out of that courthouse carrying something no amount of freedom can lighten. I want to say something about this, and I'm going to say it plainly. The granddaughter in this case is also a victim.
Not of the murder, but of the situation she was born into, of the family she did not choose, of the mother who, according to prosecutors, put her in an impossible position. That doesn't erase her role. The justice system accounted for both things, her participation and her circumstances. But when we talk about cases like this, we cannot reduce every person in the story to a simple label: perpetrator, victim, accomplice. Sometimes people are all of those things at once.
Why did Candace Craig kill her mother? Prosecutors gave the jury an answer: money. Specifically, allegations of financial fraud. The prosecution said that Candace believed her mother had defrauded her, had taken something that was hers, had manipulated finances in some way that Candace saw as a betrayal. Now, I want to be careful here because we only have one side of this story. Margaret Craig is dead. She cannot tell us what happened with the money, whether there was fraud, whether she did something wrong, or whether Candace's grievance was based on a misunderstanding. What we know is what the prosecution argued. Candace and Margaret argued, possibly on multiple occasions. The argument reached a breaking point, and Margaret paid for it with her life. Here's what I find most haunting about this motive. Money disputes in families are so common they're almost mundane. Inheritance arguments, disagreements about loans that were never repaid, resentments about who got what and who was treated fairly. Most of those arguments end in cold dinners and strained holidays. Almost none of them end like this. Which means the money wasn't really about the money. It was about what the money represented: respect, power, who was right, who had wronged whom, who was going to be held accountable. And somewhere inside that house, on a day we can only imagine, Margaret Craig pushed back one more time, and her daughter decided she was done listening. When the case of the state of Maryland versus Candace Craig finally went to trial, two very different stories were told in that courtroom. The prosecution's story was simple. Candace Craig attacked and killed her elderly mother. Then she and her daughter spent days trying to destroy the evidence. Cold-blooded, calculated, first-degree murder. The defense's story was more complicated. Yes, Margaret is dead. Yes, Candace lied. Yes, the cover-up happened. But lying to police doesn't prove premeditated murder. Neither does destroying evidence after the fact. People do desperate, terrible things after accidents, after fights that go wrong, after moments they cannot take back. The question the jury had to answer: which story fit the facts? The prosecution had several things working in their favor. First, the crime scene itself. The nature of what was done to Margaret's body was not consistent with panic. A chainsaw, multiple attempts at disposal over multiple days. This was organized, sustained effort. Second, the lies. Candace had lied specifically and deliberately to mislead investigators. Third, and perhaps most powerfully, the granddaughter, sitting on that witness stand, telling the jury what she saw, what she did, what her mother asked her to do. For the defense, the granddaughter's testimony was their biggest obstacle. How do you tell a jury to disbelieve someone who was there, someone who has nothing left to gain from lying? But they tried. They questioned her credibility. They raised doubts about whether her account was shaped by a plea deal. They did their job. And then the jury made their decision. Margaret Craig was 71 years old. She had 7 decades of living before she walked into that house. 7 decades of mornings and holidays and phone calls and opinions and memories and love. All of that got swallowed up by the way she died, by the charges and the courtroom and the headlines. But she existed before any of this. She deserved better than to be remembered only for the way her family failed her. So tonight, before you close this video, I just want to say her name one more time. Margaret Craig, we remember you. If this case affected you the way it affected me when I was researching it, drop a comment below. Tell me what part hit hardest. Tell me what question you're still sitting with. I read every comment, every one. If you want more cases like this, cases that go deeper than the crime, cases about the people and the families and the impossible questions, subscribe, hit the bell. It genuinely helps this channel keep going and keep covering stories that deserve more attention than they've gotten. And if you know someone who should hear about elder abuse, about family financial exploitation, about the warning signs that a family situation has crossed a line, share this video with them. That's not about views. That's about the reason I make these. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and take care of the people in your life who are counting on you.